Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Found Love in Many Hearts, Shizune, Tsunade, Mei, Kurenai, and Koyuki, Part 3. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Well, how are you going to compensate me? Tsunade teased while she stared deeply into Naruto's eyes and placed her hands on his chest. Like this, Naruto stated before pulling Tsunade into a passionate kiss. She immediately responded by throwing her arms around his neck and deepened the kiss while their tongues playfully massaged each other. However, Tsunade noticed something different. Naruto was all stiff. Usually when they would kiss he would have picked her up, so she was forced to wrap her legs around his waist. However, he seemed a little preoccupied. What's wrong? Tsunade asked as they broke apart from the kiss and leaving a trail of saliva still connected on their lips. I'm sorry, I've just got a lot on my mind, Naruto said with a sigh while Tsunade frowned as he seemed stressed out. However, she smiled as soon as she thought of a plan. How about I give you a massage and you can tell me what the problem is, Tsunade whispered as she broke out of Naruto's embrace and walked behind him and quickly wrapped her arms around his midsection. I'm not sure that will work, Naruto replied while closing his eyes as he felt Tsunade place kisses on his neck. Why don't we try anyway? Get undressed, Tsunade purred seductively into his ear and gently nibbled on it before releasing her hold and walked into the bathroom. Naruto smiled as he felt Tsunade let go and walk into the bathroom. Truth was, he was stressed and worried. The mission tomorrow was important. He knew it was when he signed up for it, but he needed to put on a facade that made him seem cool about it since he didn't want to worry everyone. It was a mission that could either mean winning the war or losing the war, and it was a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He had suspected Mei had seen through it as she kept him behind and asked him if he really wanted to do this. And now it seemed Tsunade did as well. He didn't know what it was. Perhaps he was more loose about things around his women friends, or perhaps it was just he could never lie to strong-willed women. It was the same with his mother. He quickly shook off that idea as Mei was his only women friend in the camp. In fact, she was the only person he actually talked to except for Ao and Chojuro every now and then. Quickly removing his clothes until he was only left in his boxer shorts, Naruto waited for Tsunade. Tsunade walked out of the bathroom holding a bottle that Naruto suspected to be massage oil and raised an eyebrow at her as she stopped in front of him. Well, aren't you going to get undressed? Tsunade asked, a little annoyed that Naruto was still in his boxer shorts. You want these off too? Naruto asked, pointing towards boxer shorts in surprise since he knew Tsunade hated it when Naruto was overly perverted around her, despite the fact in his opinion when she wanted she was far more perverted. Scene. Yes, now get them off. It's not like I haven't seen your before and we both know I've done more than see it. I've ed and touched it, now get it out, Tsunade commanded while Naruto quickly pulled his shorts down, revealing his semi-erect for Tsunade, and her white talk had made him a little hard. It wasn't often Tsunade talked like this. He assumed she was extremely horny. See, was that too hard? Now go lie on the bed, Tsunade commanded while Naruto huffed at her impatient attitude and raised his eyebrows when he noticed the towels already placed on the bed. You were expecting this? Naruto asked, turning around looking towards Tsunade as she seemed to be in the process of discarding her own clothes. Well, I did hope that we could play masseuse and her client, Tsunade said playfully as she removed her kimono-style blouse and revealed her large size S. They're as impressive as always, Naruto said with a smile and cupped one of Tsunade's S and squeezed it, making her immediately. Naruto smiled at his ability to pleasure Tsunade. After all, he had spent hours with her S doing all sorts with them. Go lie on the bed, Tsunade ed as she resisted the urge to just let him fondle her tits. Fine, spoil sport, Naruto said, whiling her before lying on the bed on his front, leaving a turned-on Tsunade. Bastard, turning me on like this and stopping. Oh, you are so dead, Tsunade grinned as she peeled off her blue bottoms and white panties, leaving herself completely. Walking over towards the bed, she poured some massage oil onto her hands and rubbed it together before she rubbed her hand up and down her body, making her skin look more tanned and wet. Satisfied at her work, Tsunade poured more massage oil onto her hand and rubbed it all over Naruto's back while gently pressing her fingers into his skin. "Oh, that's good," Naruto said as he felt Tsunade massage his neck and shoulders. Tsunade smiled at the comment. She didn't know why she was doing this for him. It was meant to be just. However, she had been finding herself worrying about him more and more, especially ever since she found out he was participating in the civil war. "Turn over," Tsunade commanded as she poured more massage oil onto her hands and proceeded to rub her hands on Naruto's chest and moved her hands down and lightly scraped his manhood before going down to his thighs. However, she could tell it was killing him as his hard-on was pointing completely in the air, and every time her fingers got even close to his manhood he'd buck his hips up. "Are you feeling better now?" Tsunade asked while smirking as she saw Naruto practically begging for release, but she was going to make him ask for it. "Why, yeah, your hands are the best," Naruto said as he felt Tsunade's nails graze his. "That's good, maybe we should stop then," Tsunade said with a grin as she watched Naruto's eyes widen in shock. "No," Naruto shouted as he looked at Tsunade before blushing at his outburst. I mean, well, you know," Naruto shifted uncomfortably and he could tell Tsunade was doing this on purpose. She always liked to be the dominant one when they had. "Beg," Tsunade purred as poked the top of Naruto's. "Please," Naruto whined as he felt Tsunade touching him, but he wanted more. "Please, what?" Tsunade leaned in next to Naruto's ear and did it while her hands stayed millimeters away from Naruto's painfully erected. "Please touch me," Naruto gasped out. "Since you asked nicely," Tsunade purred again and slowly wrapped her fingers around his and started to delicately move her hand up and down in a pumping motion, while her other hand cupped his balls and played with them. "Your balls are so full, didn't I drain them enough last time?" Tsunade asked while positioning herself between Naruto's legs and gave his balls a squeeze, causing Naruto to groan. She smiled as she watched him become putty in her hands. She knew his balls were his weak spot. They were always so full and she was more than willing to drain them every time. Her hand picked up speed as she continued the hand job. However, when she stopped, she could have laughed at Naruto's face as disappointment was written all over it. "Relax," Tsunade whispered before leaning in and gave the head of his shaft a kiss, causing him to buck his hips again and pushed his through her lips. "Oh, that feels good," Naruto said as he heard Tsunade ling on his. He tangled his fingers into her hair and watched her lips slide up and down his. However, the last straw for Naruto was when he felt Tsunade tickle the underside of his head with her tongue and bucked his hips up while coming. Tsunade said as she felt Naruto's cum flood her mouth. If one thing was certain, she enjoyed Naruto's taste. She let Naruto's out of her mouth when she felt her mouth become too full and was surprised when another large shot of cum flew out of his and landed on her face, covering most of her nose and parts of her eyelids. Well, that was a more than usual. Tsunade managed to get out after she had swallowed his cum and wiped his cum off her face before putting it in her mouth and savoring his taste. "Yeah, I don't think I've ever came like that before. You certainly know how to get the best of me, don't you, my legendary Naruto said, panting slightly while smirking. "You like that moniker, don't you?" Tsunade said while crawling up Naruto's body and let her rest on his stomach, allowing his still hard rest between her cheeks before leaning down and planting a passionate kiss on him. Naruto wrapped his arms around her waist and fought her tongue with his own. He could feel her hands running through his hair as she seemed to desperately cling onto him. Eventually, the two of them broke apart and she smiled at him before bringing her hand down and gripped his at the base while lifting her body up. "No more foreplay?" Naruto asked with raised eyebrows. He knew that Tsunade enjoyed having her ed more than anyone, so he found it quite a surprise she would want to skip. "Yes, I've made myself too horny with that blowjob. I need you inside me," Tsunade finished by dropping herself onto Naruto's tool and ed as his prodded her womb. "God, that feels so good," Naruto ed out as he felt Tsunade's clench around his, while Tsunade ed in agreement at the feeling of his filling her up. After she had gotten used to Naruto's size in her, she slowly started to use her thighs to bounce on Naruto and made sure only the head of his was still her before she dropped back down, creating a loud slapping noise. Naruto had to give it to Tsunade. He had completely forgot all of his worries about the upcoming mission and found himself just enjoying the view of Tsunade as her S would bounce up and down, how her vagina would slide down his and meet his balls. Tsunade had eventually started to move sideways as well, making his rub her inside, sending a wave of pleasure to the both of them. "Oh Naruto, I'm close," Tsunade ed out through gritted teeth as she tried to make him come first by bouncing faster and harder. "Yeah, me too," Naruto replied as he shut his eyes and grabbed Tsunade's cheeks so hard there was going to be handprints tomorrow. Feeling as if he was on his last legs, Naruto slightly opened his eyes and glared at Tsunade as he saw her smiling. He knew she knew he was about to come. However, he immediately smiled back as he brought his fingers to their colliding genitals and pinched her, causing her eyes to widen in shock. "Naruto!" Tsunade shouted as she came. Naruto closed his eyes and grunted as he felt Tsunade's orgasm drench his balls and came himself. Several shots of his cum flew straight into Tsunade's womb and sent her off screaming again until Naruto pulled her down into a kiss, to which she gladly accepted as he continued to thrust into her. After they had both stopped coming, they were still surprisingly locked in a kiss, and after several minutes they both pulled back looking flushed. 2 months without. God, how did I go 20 years? Tsunade said with a chuckle as she kissed Naruto's chin. "It's because it's 2 months without me," Naruto replied jokingly as he kissed her forehead, and surprisingly she didn't deny it like he thought she would. "Anyway, if I'm going to have to go another 2 months, then I'm stocking up now," Tsunade finished as she sat back up and shook her body and ed as Naruto's rubbed her sensitive insides again. "You're still ready to go, aren't you?" Tsunade asked with a frown. However, she screamed in pleasure as she felt Naruto flip her around so she was on the bottom in the missionary position. "For you always," Naruto replied and started thrusting into her as hard and fast as he could before leaning down and capturing her lips in another kiss, muffling out her screams and s. For the rest of night the sounds of ing, shouting, laughing and grunting could be heard from the room as they both continued to go at it like rabbits. End of. Naruto dropped onto his back panting heavily while Tsunade dropped her head onto his chest, her blonde hair sprawling out all over him. Wow. I think I'm going to be sore tomorrow, Tsunade panted, rising her head so her chin was on his chest and stared at his glazed over expression and smiled. "Why yeah, that was intense. I think you emptied my balls with that last time," Naruto also panted, snapping out of his glazed expression and looked down towards Tsunade before gently tracing her spine with his hand and smiled at the she let off. "I know. My womb feels so full. It's a good job I'm using the anti-pregnancy jutsu, otherwise I'm certain I'd be carrying your child," Tsunade said while smirking, secretly enjoying the feeling of his seed inside her. Naruto merely hummed in response, exhaustion creeping up on him, and trailed his hand down onto hair and fingered his Hiraishin mark. "So, what had you so stressed earlier?" Tsunade asked, closing her eyes and resting her head on Naruto's chest while her finger traced his chest in random lines. "I have a mission. It could either save the bloodline users, or it could destroy them. Either way, whatever happens, it's on me," Naruto said, sighing as he wrapped both of his arms around Tsunade as he felt her climb on top of him and nuzzled her face into his neck. "Why do you always put yourself in such dangerous situations?" Tsunade asked as she frowned into his skin. Her voice was laced in worry and something else Naruto couldn't pick up on. "I don't know," Naruto muttered, burying his face into Tsunade's hair, secretly enjoying the smell. "You know you could always leave. I mean, people always die protecting villages. That's never going to change, so why risk your life?" Tsunade said and hesitated slightly while Naruto continued to breathe in her scent and groaned as he felt one of Tsunade's hand begin to stroke his manhood. "Join us, me and Shizune. We could end every night like this. Me, you, a hotel room and hours of non-stop pleasuring," Tsunade purred out seductively and kissed Naruto's neck. Naruto was extremely tempted to take the offer. Who wouldn't? Tsunade Senju was a beautiful woman. Even if he didn't love her, he still cared for her a lot, and here she was offering him her body every night. However, the images of Mei, Sufu, the rest of the bloodline users, and finally Minato came into Naruto's head. "I'm sorry. I need to find answers and I can only get them in Kurigakure," Naruto explained sadly and kissed the top of Tsunade's head as he heard her sigh in disappointment. I guess every 2 months isn't so bad, Tsunade said while stopping her pumping motion on Naruto's and laid her hand on his chest. You don't have to wait 2 months for me, you know, Naruto said so that Tsunade didn't think that she had to wait for him to have. They were both single. He wanted her to feel free. I know, but I wouldn't be surprised if mine was shaped into the shape of your. It wouldn't feel the same if it's not yours, Tsunade said with a laugh. It was soon followed by Naruto and a couple minutes of silence. You know, I've only ever had with 2 people, Tsunade said, breaking the silence. She didn't know why, but she liked the feeling of cuddling up to someone in bed and just talking. It felt like she was letting out a lot of her pain. Naruto on the other hand raised his eyebrows at Tsunade. He knew she was a little talkative after, not that he minded, but it was strange to see the legendary Sannin Tsunade, a woman whose punches could kill the strongest shinobi in one hit, talk so deeply with him. Oh, and who are these lucky people? Naruto said with a grin, forcing a large smile on Tsunade as she kissed his chest. My ex-lover Dan, and you, Tsunade admitted with a blush as she felt Naruto staring at her. Shizune's uncle, Naruto asked as he remembered Shizune telling him the story of how Tsunade fell into the state she was in. He felt her nod into his chest and tightened his embrace around her. Are you ashamed of what we've done? Naruto questioned, and immediately Tsunade's head snapped up and she stared at Naruto in astonishment. No, of course not. It's natural to want another's physical contact. I'll never be ashamed of what we've done together, Tsunade confirmed and smiled when she watched Naruto grin. So, who's better, me or Dan? Naruto asked, and immediately Tsunade blushed while glaring at Naruto. Usually she would have killed anyone for even mentioning Dan's name, yet here she was letting him not only talk about him, but talk about him in a competitive way. Shut up and cuddle me, Tsunade demanded, and wrapped her arms around his torso and buried her face into his neck once more. Naruto smiled as he watched the famous legendary Sannin blush in front of him and pulled the cover over their sweaty bodies. I'll take that as me, Naruto admitted confidently and placed a kiss on Tsunade's head while smiling as she never denied it, and fell asleep with Tsunade wrapped tightly around him. Be careful, I'd hate to have my only way of release taken from me, Tsunade admitted as she was now fully dressed and stared at Naruto as he prepared to leave. They had woken up pretty early so they could get a couple of rounds in. She was happy they were able to get 1 round in the bed and 1 in the shower before getting dressed, and she could happily say she was satisfied. I'll try, but even then I'm sure your magic hands could do wonders, Naruto said with another confident grin and walked over towards Tsunade and grabbed her by the hips. What about my mouth? Tsunade asked with a pout as she desperately wanted Naruto to kiss her. Oh, definitively with your mouth, Naruto confirmed as he leaned in and placed his lips onto Tsunade's. She immediately opened her mouth, allowing Naruto's tongue to explore her. It. See you in 2 months, Naruto said, moving back from the kiss and placed a kiss on her forehead before disappearing in a yellow flash. Please don't die, Tsunade whispered to herself as she clutched onto the green necklace around her pale neck. Naruto appeared next to his bed and sighed. Tonight he would have to leave the camp and infiltrate Kurigakure no Sato and rescue the prisoners. He did feel slightly better after his meeting with Tsunade. She had reminded him of everything he was fighting for and his main goal, to protect Minato, and if there were answers in Kurigakure, he knew the village was his best shot. With that in mind, Naruto climbed onto his bed and slowly went to sleep, knowing that this may be his last chance in a while. Naruto opened his eyes at the sound of someone knocking on his door. Sitting up quickly, he turned to look at the clock on his table to see what time it was inside. It seemed he only had an hour before he had to leave for the mission. Putting on his black Anbu top and bottoms with mesh underneath and finished the look off with a gray chest plate over his torso, his hands now equipped with his fingerless gloves that had full back metal protection on them. He walked towards the door as he heard the continuous knocking and opened it and came face to face with Hogosha, the one man he didn't want to see. Mei-sama asked for your company, Hogosha said while glaring at Naruto. Okay, tell Mei-chan I'll be right there, Naruto said with a smirk as he watched Hogosha turn around and growl. Going back into his room, Naruto strapped his katana around his waist and disappeared with the body flicker technique and appeared right outside the rebel headquarters. He made his way past the usual guard and through the hallways until he reached Mei's room. He knocked a few times, letting her know of his presence, and smiled faintly when he heard her voice. "Come in, Naruto-kun." Naruto opened the door and peeked his head through and noticed she was alone sitting in her chair staring at Naruto, her green eyes shining with happiness as she watched him walk in. "You wanted to see me, Mei?" Naruto asked, causing her to blush due to the feeling he gave her. However, she quickly composed herself and smiled. "Yes, I wanted to see you before you set off for the mission," Mei said, crossing her arms over her chest, raising her S slightly so Naruto could see. "Oh, so you wanted to see my handsome face before I left?" Naruto smirked as he stared at Mei's S that were only just covered by her blue dress. Who could blame him? He was a man after all. "And what if I did?" Mei asked with a flirty smile. "Then I hope you're satisfied," Naruto said with an equally flirty smile. It was one of the things they would do as both of them were flirts, and it wasn't unusual to hear both Naruto and Mei walk around the camp flirting with one another. Some of the people had even suspected that their leader and Naruto were even intimate with one another, while others played it off due to their natures. "I am. However, there is also another reason to why I called you here, and it's this," Mei said, pulling out a large piece of paper and handed it to Naruto. "It's a map for your escape route. I need you to take a good look at this, as this map could ultimately save your life," Mei said as she stood up and watched the setting sun. "Thank you. It's a shame I have no way of repaying you for all you've done," Naruto said with an amused smile. However, he was shocked at how fast Mei spun around and made her way over to him. "You don't have to thank me, Naruto-kun. What you're doing for me, all of us. However, if you do feel like repaying me, there is always this." Mei suddenly grabbed Naruto's cheeks and pressed her lips onto his and slowly entangled her arms around his neck and played with the back of his hair. Naruto's eyes widened and placed his hands on her waist as he felt Mei's lips upon his. Her soft touches on him made him slowly close his eyes and open his mouth and allow Mei's tongue to battle with his, and stayed there for at least 10 minutes before departing from each other's mouth. However, they both still clung to one another, refusing to let go. "Well, that's some way of paying you back," Naruto said as he laced his fingers through Mei's auburn hair. "Yeah," Mei sighed as she rested her forehead on his and stared into his eyes, their lips inches away from one another. "Do I get another one if I come back alive?" Naruto asked with an amused smile and watched as Mei took a thoughtful expression. "If you come back, I'll give you more than this." Naruto was shocked by what she said for a second before he grinned and let go of her. "I guess I just have to come back now," Naruto said and placed his hood over his head before disappearing with the body flicker technique. "Yeah, you do," Mei said as she stared at the spot Naruto was in, the familiar feeling floating all around her chest before she sat down on her chair and smiled. Naruto appeared at the entrance of the camp and frowned when he noticed Hogosha standing at the gate. "So you're leaving?" Hogosha asked with a smirk, knowing there was a high chance Naruto would die. Naruto could hear the happiness in the man's voice. To be honest, he couldn't really blame him. If the woman he had a crush on was flirting with another guy, he'd certainly want him out of the way. "Yeah," Naruto said as she walked past Hogosha exiting the camp. "Hogosha?" Naruto exclaimed, causing the man to look at him. "Yeah, just so you know, Mei has really soft lips," Naruto said with a smirk before jumping into the trees towards Kurigakure no Sato. "Bastard," Hogosha said, clenching his hands so tight they turned white at the thought of Naruto kissing his childhood crush. It took Naruto a few hours to reach the village. He noticed the patrols some of the shinobis would do, however he was lucky enough to be able to read their movements and patterns and get out of the way, and as he reached the gate he noticed two guards. Naruto snapped out of his thoughts and hid in the shrubbery next to him and narrowed his eyes. It was a little difficult to see due to the darkness and the mist, however he could make out the shapes moving, and as soon as both the guards turned away from the gate he launched forward and chopped them both in the back of the neck, knocking them out effectively before hiding their bodies away in a small hut next to the gate. The village itself felt dead. The numerous patrols around the cities told Naruto immediately that this was not a safe place to live in or near. Jumping onto a building and hiding on the sloped slide of the roof, Naruto pulled out the map Mei gave him. He could see the building that had the prisoners in. The only real problem was getting into it, as there seemed to be shinobi everywhere surrounding it. Actually, there shouldn't be this many shinobi in the village at the same time. Does Yagura know, or is he just hiding inside these walls? Naruto thought, slightly confused at the Mizukage's behavior. Deciding that taking the backstreets would be the safest route, as both jumping across the rooftops and walking through the main streets would be suicide, and the body flicker technique was definitively out of the question, as with this many Junin rank shinobi in the village he would be noticed immediately. Naruto quickly rushed into an alley as he heard the sound of voices and hid behind the wall as he heard them walk past. Sighing to himself, Naruto looked back at the map and noticed he was still a few blocks away from where he was meant to be, and so he quickly rushed into another alley, hoping that no one had seen him. After taking a couple of delayed breaths, Naruto peeked his head around the corner and saw the building he was aiming for was a giant tower with a pointed roof. There were multiple balconies and floors. The moment he looked at the building, he could tell it was a prison. Shit, the streets are packed with shinobi, Naruto thought as he looked around and couldn't find a single opening. Pulling out the map Mei had given him, Naruto glanced at the paper and widened his eyes as he realized a large pipe that ran underneath where he was standing, and it led straight into the prison. He could only hope it was water mains instead of the sewage. Quickly creating a hole in the ground with his control over Doden Earth ninjutsu, Naruto sank into the ground and located the pipe. Jumping onto it, pulling out a kunai from his pouch located around his waist, he cut a small opening and sighed when he saw the clear water rushing into the prison. Taking a breath, Naruto lowered himself into the water and let the flow of the water take him. As he kept going forward, he noticed the pipe he was in was extended onto another pipe that split out into 3 directions. Looking around, Naruto noticed a valve just above where the pipe split off. Quickly latching himself onto the circular handle, Naruto slowly began to turn it, loosening it so he could lift the hatch up. Before fully lifting it up, Naruto checked around the room using a small gap, and once he was certain the room was clear, he jumped out and slowly closed it again. Looking around, Naruto could guess he was in the maintenance room, especially if the wires and boilers all around said anything. Pulling out a separate map, Naruto located the maintenance room and quickly scanned for the floor the prisoners were being kept on. Cursing the fact the prisoners were still a floor down, Naruto exited the room and found himself running sneakily down a corridor. After running down the stairs, Naruto came upon a gate that was padlocked several times and raised an eyebrow at the security. However, shaking the thought off, Naruto unsheathed his katana and sliced the padlocks off before opening the gate. As he walked forwards in another corridor, he heard the sounds of talking and quickly slowed his pace down. Seeing as the talking was coming from 2 guards blocking a large wooden door, Naruto threw 2 kunai at them and watched as their bodies fell to floor like a sack of potatoes. He made his way towards the gate and pushed them open, ignoring the bodies of the 2 guards below him. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he walked past the gates and looked at the room in front of him. As hanging from the ceiling there were hundreds of cages hanging from them with groups of people in them. "Hey, you help me!" a man shouted from one of the cages as he noticed Naruto walk into the room, closely followed by several other shouts asking for the same thing. "Step back," Naruto said as he quickly jumped into the air while unsheathing his katana and sliced the bars of the cages in half. As he dropped back down to the floor, Naruto's eyes scanned the room until they came across a lever. Walking over towards it, Naruto grabbed the top and pulled it back. Immediately a gear started to turn forwards and lowered chains so the cages hit the floor. The cage he had already cut open was quickly emptied, and sighing to himself, Naruto created several more shadow clones and they got to work cutting the rest of the cages. After everyone had been released, Naruto stared at everybody. It would be impossible to sneak these numbers out of the village unnoticed without a distraction. "Hey, what are we going to do?" Naruto heard someone ask and glanced around the room to see the condition people were in. They all looked tired, exhausted and scared. Sighing, Naruto turned around and checked if the corridor was clear. "Follow me quickly," Naruto whispered and began walking down the corridor slowly. The prisoners followed. Naruto scowled at the thought of not being able to follow his plan of a quick in and out. He had severely underestimated the condition the people were going to be in and knew at this point they wouldn't have the ability to survive heavy streams, so he couldn't get out the way he got in. As he walked up some stairs, Naruto quickly passed the maintenance room and continued to walk up until he reached ground level. Approaching two guards, Naruto quickly kicked one in the back of the knee and slammed the other one's face into the wall, crushing his skull. "Where's the exit?" Naruto asked the guard, who was groaning painfully as his leg was completely out of place. Please," the guard said as Naruto tightened his hold around the guard's neck. "Tell me," Naruto replied in an emotionless tone and stared at the guard's face expressionlessly, making the guard sweat. "It's down TT the corridor," the guard stuttered before Naruto tightened his grip and watched the guard's neck snapped like a toothpick in his hands. Wordlessly, Naruto began walking again, followed by the prisoners as they looked sick at the sight they had just seen. Naruto rested his head on the door as he made it to the main entrance and quickly turned around and stared at the prisoners while they watched him in anticipation. "I'm not going to lie, a lot of you may die when we go outside, however you also lived in this village. You should know all the shortcuts to get out of the village without being detected. When we go out, I'm going to turn left and distract their army. Meanwhile, I want the rest of you to turn right and escape. Make your way to the forest a couple of miles outside the village," Naruto stated, getting gasps off some of the prisoners. "But we'll be seen," one of them shouted out. "Only if you're not quick. Use the cover of night to your advantage. Are you ready?" Naruto asked, gripping the door knobs. Hesitantly, the prisoners nodded and Naruto smirked before pushing the doors open, quickly throwing several smoke bombs towards the right. Naruto nodded towards the prisoners before pulling out a kunai with an explosive tag. "Go," Naruto stated, running to the left, splitting up with everyone, and chucked the kunai at a large group of shinobis, effectively getting their attention. "Get him," Naruto heard as he felt several people approaching him and jumped into the air, evading several kunai and shuriken. By pure reactions, Naruto jumped into the air and tucked his legs up, narrowly dodging an attack that would have sliced his body in half, and fell backwards, rolling off the roof when he noticed the growing numbers of enemies surrounding him. Rolling himself back up, Naruto unsheathed his katana and blocked an attack from behind before kicking an enemy in front of him and swinging backwards, separating the enemy's head from his shoulders. "Shit," Naruto thought, watching several shinobi go through hand seals and watched as several giant water dragons appeared and launched towards him. Quickly thinking, he pulled out a Hiraishin kunai and threw it towards a group of enemies behind him and watched as it stuck into the stomach of one of them and disappeared in a yellow flash. Appearing in front of the man, Naruto stomped on his head and quickly formed a Rasengan, knocking a large group of enemies back. Well, Naruto, Namikaze comes to join us. Last I heard you were dead, killed by the Kyuubi, but then that's all in the past, right? Even though you will be killed by a Biju today," Yagura said, appearing in the street in front of Naruto and started forming red chakra around himself. Naruto immediately went through hand seals and a barrage of wooden branches flew towards Yagura and the rest of the shinobis. Yagura smacked them away while the other shinobis were not so lucky and were sent flying back into buildings. Naruto's eyes widened, however, as he watched the branches that weren't destroyed by Yagura up part of his Biju chakra. "What? I know Mukten has the ability to suppress the Kyuubi abilities, but does it work on the rest of the Biju as well?" Naruto quickly back-flipped over an attack Yagura sent that burnt the ground. "Shit," Naruto cursed as he watched several enemies stand up and Yagura continued to become more monstrous in power and form. Backstepping to dodge out of the way of an attack from a sword, Naruto quickly kneed the man in stomach and sliced his head in half. However, the slight change in wind forced Naruto to widen his eyes as he saw a Biju enhanced punch come flying towards his face, and unable to dodge, Naruto closed his eyes and took the punch full force and was sent flying into loads of different buildings. "Shit," Naruto thought as he laid in thousands of pieces of rubble. It didn't help that his head was spinning and he could barely see in front of him due to his vision becoming blurry because of the pain and blood. "Arg, there's too many of them," Naruto said in frustration, pulling himself up and wiped the trickle of blood off his face that was coming from his forehead. "Give up, Namikaze. You're surrounded and with your death the rebellion will be over, Yugura said emotionlessly as his Biju cloak still shrouded around him. Naruto quickly went through hand seals and slammed his hands onto the ground. Immediately a pillar of wood rose below, propelling him in the air above everyone. As he ascended into the air, Naruto could see the large group of prisoners escaping from the village. I need to buy some more time for them, Naruto thought while deflecting several shurikens with his katana. Quickly noticing several junins running up the wooden pillar he had created, Naruto back-flipped off it and sliced one of the junins in half as he was falling. Landing in a crouched position, Naruto noticed that the Kurigakure shinobi had driven further and further into the village. He could tell they were trying to corner him from the direction they were sending their jutsus towards him from blocking any exit he may have found. Of course he could have used the Hiraishin no Jutsu to escape the village, however he knew the prisoners needed more time to escape, otherwise they'd be captured and sent back into the prisoner worst killed, meaning the whole mission would have been a waste of time. Naruto leapt from street to street, avoiding any of the open ones and stuck to narrow tight cornered ones to avoid any hits from stray jutsus. However, as he was about to turn into another street, he was punched so hard he was sent flying through multiple buildings, completely destroying them. Forests outside of Kurigakure. Mei narrowed her eyes as she watched the giant cloud of dust that formed in the air from several buildings being destroyed. Be careful, Naruto-kun. Don't underestimate Yugura, she thought, worried over the blonde-haired shinobi. She had been having doubts about the plan and whether Naruto would be able to make it back alive. His death itself would affect the rebel army more than anything, as the morale would be down after losing one of their only trump cards in this war. Mei-sama, a Kurigakure rebel shouted, causing her to turn towards him. Report, she commanded. We've made contact with the prisoners, he said, and Mei could tell the man had a happy tone in his voice. Great, tell everyone we're pulling back, Mei said and walked back, turning her head back towards the village inside. Please come back, Naruto-kun, she whispered before lifting her hand in the air and letting off a flare, and immediately a red ball shot off into the air. With Naruto. Naruto groaned as he laid on his back. He felt like he had just been hit by a train. What the hell was that? He thought to himself, struggling to lift a giant piece of timber off of his body, and dragged himself to his feet barely. Do you really think you're going to escape the village alive? Look at the state you're in. Naruto's one opened eye glared at the figure walking towards him as Yugura stood there, his right arm engulfed in Biju chakra. What did you expect to happen? That you would be able to sneak into the village and rescue the prisoners while leaving unharmed? Yugura questioned as he stopped walking and one by one shinobis landed behind him. That's a foolish belief, isn't it? You're just one man and even you have your limits, Yugura said again while his body became engulfed in Biju chakra and his skin peeled off. Naruto's body staggered slightly. There was blood pouring down his face. His arm lay limp as blood trickled down it and dripped off his fingers. His clothes had been ripped as well. His top had been almost completely blown off, leaving only his right sleeve and shoulder. His pants had been ripped and one shin was showing, covered in blood. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the flare Mei had sent go in the air and smiled slightly despite the feeling of wanting to continue to fight Yugura. They're safe. Looks like I can finally get out of here, Naruto thought as he put on of his hands into a seal. His eyes widened in horror, however, as he felt the Hiraishin tag he had placed at the camp had disappeared. Let me ask you one question, Namikaze. Why did you get yourself involved in this war? Was it the longing to be with your parents, or did you really believe you could stop me? Why exactly did you help that foolish woman? Yugura said in a deeper voice as his body finished finally transforming into his Biju form. Naruto stared in horror as particles suddenly formed in the air near Yugura and came together to form a small black ball. I can't escape. I came here to protect everyone, yet I can't even protect myself. Is this it? Am I really going to die here? Naruto fell to his knees, panting for breath as his wounds finally started to affect him. Pity, you had so much potential. Naruto heard and glared at Yugura in his Biju form and gasped at the Biju bomb that was floating in the air. Goodbye, Namikaze Naruto, Yugura said before firing the Biju bomb towards Naruto. Naruto felt the wind the Biju bomb had created and sighed. This was it. his end. Take care of Minato-chan, Naruto-chan. Naruto gasped as he saw the image of his mother dying in front of him. I wouldn't worry, I promise things will become better for you. Naruto raised his head and stared at the Biju bomb coming towards him. He couldn't let it end like this. He had too many people to protect and promises to fulfill. Arghhhh. Naruto shouted, slamming his fists to the ground even though his body could barely move, and to everyone's surprise hundreds of giant wood tentacles came out of the ground and quickly formed together wrapping around Naruto. Everyone watched in shock as the tentacles slowly formed. First came the giant feet and legs that was shaped into samurai armor strangely enough, then came the chest that was also in samurai armor, and finally the head formed and set upon it was a helmet with two giant spikes on the top, and in its hands were two giant wooden swords. Imagine a smaller version of Madara's perfect Susanoo made of wood. What's happening? It's just like that time. Naruto thought back to the incident when his brother was born and the wood protected him, as wood tentacles carried his body into the air until he was staring through the eye holes of the giant wooden samurai. The giant wooden samurai swung both of its wooden blades at the Biju bomb, and everyone watched in amazement as the wooden samurai started to strain under the pressure of the Biju bomb and forced it to take a step back. Eventually, however, the swords amazingly sliced through the giant sphere, causing a giant explosion. Naruto stared at the explosion in awe. The wood was protecting him, however he knew he had to use this time to think of an escape plan. Closing his eyes in concentration, Naruto searched for any Hiraishin tag he could find that he could go to. His chakra levels were basically wiped out for now, so he couldn't go somewhere far away like Tsunade. His eyes widened as he remembered Tsunade, the kunai he had back in his cabin in the camp. It would certainly be a risk, but it was his only chance. Putting his hand into a seal, Naruto closed his eyes and disappeared in yellow flash, leaving hundreds of confused shinobis as the giant wooden samurai started to dismantle and collapse. Bastard, Yagura said through gritted teeth as he turned his back and started walking towards his tower, leaving the Kurigakure shinobi who were searching through the mass of wood looking for Naruto. Naruto appeared in the cabin, landing face first on the floor. Blood was continuously pouring from his body as he laid there. He could feel unconsciousness coming towards him, however he knew if he went unconscious he'd never wake back up. With that thought in mind, Naruto slowly raised his head and began to crawl towards the door of his cabin, leaving a trail of blood, and reached the door handle and struggled to pull it down. Eventually, however, Naruto managed to open the door and pull himself out of the cabin. Landing on the street, he heard multiple gasps from people near him, and the last thing he heard was someone shouting his name before finally falling unconscious. With May. May smiled as she entered the camp, and behind her so did everyone else. For many, this would be a reunion with family members, lovers and friends. I want you to help them get settled and try find some people who they might know. Things will run a lot smoother that way, May said to a platoon of shinobi, and they bowed before running to the prisoners and began to ask them questions. As May walked back to her office, she was immediately stopped by the presence of Shurui. The old woman gave May a sad look which caused May's stomach to drop slightly. What's the problem? May asked, her voice cracking ever so slightly. She knew those looks Shurui had, and it always meant bad news. It's Naruto. He's on the verge of dying. Is this as far as I can go? Naruto thought as his body floated in what seemed to be emptiness. All his senses were taken. He couldn't hear, smell, taste, touch, or even see anything. It was like he was just floating into oblivion, waiting for death to claim him. Am I dead, or am I dreaming? Naruto's eyes widened, however, as he was assaulted with hundreds of images flashing before his eyes. At first it was a small blonde-haired boy crying while hugging his knees. The image slowly formed into a man with an orange mask. Again, like the first image, it warped into a beautiful black-haired woman. He couldn't see her face, but he could tell she was beautiful. Finally the image shifted to a destroyed Konoha where he could see shinobi watching, staring towards him. Your time is not yet. Naruto gasped as he opened his eyes and immediately noticed his body not responding to any of his commands. Sighing, he noticed there was a breathing apparatus over his face covering his mouth and nose. Naruto-kun. Naruto turned his head to the source of the voice and found May. She was asleep, sitting on a chair next to his bed and was resting her head on his arm. After a lot of struggle, Naruto had managed to raise his arm and remove the breathing apparatus off of his face and sighed in relief when he felt the fresh air enter his lungs. Naruto croaked as he found himself struggling to talk and only being able to produce a humming sound. However, as if hearing him, Mei's eyes slowly opened, showing Naruto her beautiful green eyes, and they widened once she noticed Naruto staring at her. Naruto-kun, Mei gasped, sitting up and wrapping her hand around Naruto's, causing him to smile. What? Naruto rasped out as he looked towards a jug of water that was placed on the table next to his bed. Sorry, Mei gasped as she quickly poured Naruto a cup and helped him drink it. Thank you, Naruto said as he felt his voice come back to normal slowly. Mei smiled and placed the cup back on the table before returning to her previous position of holding Naruto's hand. How bad is it? Naruto asked as he felt uneasy for some reason. You have no physical injuries still. You may still feel sore, but it's your mental health I'm worried about. You're pushing yourself too hard and it's frying your body. You need to stop, Mei said as she gained a worried expression over her face. Naruto stared at her worried expression for a couple of seconds before looking up towards the wooden ceiling of his cabin. It was true he had been having headaches as well as random nosebleeds, however he had ignored them, thinking of them as nothing but a nuisance, but to think his body and mind were just too tired that it was causing him this much damage. However, even with all this he couldn't slow down. Now there were too many enemies that wouldn't hesitate to kill him or any of his precious people even with him in this state. I can't, not until I've seen this through. To go back on my promise would be a disgrace to everything I stand for, Naruto said as he slowly lifted his knees, wincing at the pain his legs caused him. Naruto-kun, Mei shouted as she stood taking a hold of Naruto's shoulder and was worrying that his body wouldn't be able to hold out. You don't need to try so hard. You've given us everything. Your body can't take much more, Mei screamed as she wrapped her arms around Naruto's torso and cried into his back, trying to stop him from moving. No, not everything, not yet, Naruto whispered as he sat on the edge of the bed as Mei continued to sob into his back. Naruto-kun, please don't push yourself too much, Mei said as she helped Naruto walk towards her office. One of his arms were flung over Mei's shoulders and she supported his weight by placing one hand on his back and the other on his stomach, being careful to avoid any sore spots. I'm fine, seriously Mei, I'm just a little sore, nothing to worry about, Naruto said, smiling towards Mei, causing her to blush. Moron, Mei muttered while Naruto continued to smile slightly. However, his smile faltered when he thought back to the battle in Kurigakure and how he was unable to escape due to his original Hiraishin mark being destroyed. He knew it didn't take much to destroy one. It was one of the weaknesses the jutsu had. However, the fact someone did destroy it proved someone didn't want him coming back. It didn't take them long to reach Mei's office and Naruto noticed the presence of Ao and several other commanders in the rebel army. Naruto-sama, are you alright? One of them asked as they took in Naruto's appearance. He had lost his any top he was wearing and was covered only by bandages around his torso. His pants covered the bandages wrapped around his shins and legs, and the bandage around his head held his hair up, preventing it from covering his eyes. Yeah, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. Give me a couple of hours and I'll be as good as new, Naruto laughed with a fake smile, ignoring Mei's worried expression. That's good to hear. Thanks to you we now have the numbers to face Yagura's force without getting massacred straight away, and with you on our side there's no way we'd lose, the same commander laughed, embarrassing Naruto slightly. We can't keep just relying on Naruto-kun now, we all must fight for freedom. Is everyone ready to head into battle? Mei asked, looking around the room. Yes, I believe so, however I'd suggest stalling the attack until tomorrow, give them all a chance to get to 100%. Another commander said, the others agreeing with him. What do you two think? Should we delay the attack until tomorrow? Mei asked, looking between both Naruto and Ao, causing both shinobi to look at each other and nod. We believe it's probably the best option, Mei-sama. Let the men, women and children have one more night to relax, as tomorrow may be their last, Ao said, and Naruto nodded, agreeing with his decision. Very well, I want you to tell every shinobi capable of battle to be ready by tomorrow morning, as tomorrow we claim back everything that was taken from us, Mei said, and the commanders nodded before disappearing with the Shunshin technique. I'm going to try control those idiots. As soon as they hear it might be our last night, they'll no doubt throw a party, Ao said with a sigh before leaving through the door. Will you be alright to go out tomorrow? Mei asked, raising an eyebrow towards Naruto. Of course, my body heals faster than most, Naruto said while standing up and only wincing slightly at the pain he felt. Everything will seem better tonight, as everything may be the last time we drink, eat, or even be happy. You shouldn't worry yourself over me, Naruto said while resting his hands on the window ledge, allowing the cool breeze to press itself against his face. Your priorities should be with everyone in the camp, not just me, and I'm certain tomorrow you'll lead everyone to victory, Naruto said while closing his eyes. You think so? Mei asked with a small blush on her face as Naruto turned around and gave a small grin. Of course you'll do brilliantly. You should believe in yourself more, especially if you want to get married, Naruto said, grinning as he watched Mei's blush disappear and she aimed a glare at him. Shut up, or I'll kill you, Mei said darkly towards Naruto as he approached the door. Yeah, sure thing. With that attitude there's no way we can lose, don't you think? I'll see you later, Mei, Naruto waved off as he exited the room, leaving a half blushing and half glaring Mei. Idiot. Naruto smiled slightly as he watched the sight in front of him, thousands of people dancing and drinking and just having fun. It was as if they had all forgot that there would be a battle tomorrow. It felt like more of a festival here than any of the others he had been to in a long time. Perhaps the thought that they may never get the chance to do this again spurred everyone to act even more outrageous than they normally would. Here you are. Naruto turned his head to Mei, walking towards him with two small dishes and a bottle of sake in her hands. Ah, Mei, you seem to be in the party mood, Naruto said amusingly as he scooted over to allow Mei to sit on the rock he was sat on. Well, what did you expect? Years of fighting might finally come to an end. I can't help but be a little excited, Mei said while placing the two dishes down and filling them up. I guess, but you'll have to take charge of Kurigakure as well, so I do not envy you, Naruto said, finishing the sake he had in his cup. Well, have you thought about staying in Kurigakure after the war? One could make it worth it, Mei purred at the last bit, finishing her cup as well. Oh, what did you have in mind? Naruto asked, amused by how Mei was flirting with him. Well, Mei said, tapping her chin with one finger while her other hand rested itself on Naruto's thigh, causing him to raise an eyebrow. I heard the Uzumaki clan were known for their stamina, and I'd be very interested in finding out if that's true, Mei smiled as she saw Naruto blush slightly as her hand trailed up and down his thigh. It seemed telling her he was part Uzumaki was a mistake, or maybe it was a blessing. Mei, what are you doing? Naruto gasped out. You know, Naruto-kun, a woman's heart is a funny and cruel thing. It causes us to act completely different, Mei said, looking at Naruto. What do you mean? Naruto asked, confused as he had never heard Mei talk like this, acting so vulnerable. It's very selfish and wants what it wants, even if it's the thing it knows it can't have, Mei whispered, her eyes shadowed by her hair. Mei, Naruto said in a low tone, staring at Mei. Come on, let's dance, Mei said, lifting her head to show a giant smile plastered on her face, confusing Naruto. Okay. Naruto smiled back, finding himself unable to resist Mei's offer. Her cheerful attitude was infectious. Mei grinned again before quickly jumping up and brushing her usual blue dress off, getting rid of any crinkles in it. Quickly grabbing Naruto's hand, Mei laughed when she heard an outburst of protest come from Naruto on dragging him. However, at the moment she didn't care. All her life she had only known this happiness once, and that was when her family was alive, people she could generally say she loved. Ever since the death of her parents and most of her family, she had been forced to take charge, going through the majority of her teen years frightened that she could be killed, and then all through her 20s leading a charge against Yagura, and slowly over the years her heart had slowly formed an ice shell and it kept her from getting close to anyone. However, when Naruto came, she had been skeptical in whether he would be able to do anything in the war, but seeing as she had nothing really left to lose, she had placed a bit of trust in him, and after he had come back accomplishing every single mission she had sent him on, Her trust in him rose every time. It wasn't long until Naruto had found a way to get closer to her, evading every single defense she had around her heart, and quickly became her friend. However, after witnessing his selflessness and courage to protect everyone, she found herself becoming flustered every time she'd see his face, and her heart would double and even treble its pace when she heard the sound of his name. After the mission to rescue the prisoners, she couldn't deny it anymore. She had fallen for Naruto. Her heart had fallen for the mysterious blonde, and no matter what she did, she couldn't stop any of it, for the man that had given her hope. However, she knew she shouldn't even. She knew Naruto's personality. She knew that even if they did win the war, Naruto wouldn't stick around. He'd said from the start he was looking for answers. Being a leader, she wasn't so naive to think he would stay in Kurigakure despite what she wanted. She had imagined in dreams and even in daydreams what her life would be like if Naruto stayed, from dates to moonlight walks, a beautiful wedding where they would offer their lives to each other and give one another their most important possession, their hearts. She had wondered at times as well, would she have had kids with him, little children she could call her children and in turn would call her mommy. However, again she'd always have to keep telling herself that it wouldn't happen. She couldn't allow herself to think that would happen. Every time she'd think of living a life with Naruto, her heart would flutter and eventually start to break. Lately though, she had been thinking of what she could do to stop her heart from these outrageous feelings, and the only time her heart would stop hurting was when she was physically close to Naruto and all round being around him. "Place your hands on my hips," Mei commanded as she had dragged Naruto into the giant group to where everyone was dancing. "How lewd, Mei-sama, what would your subordinates think?" Naruto teased, placing his hands on Mei's hips. "Shut up and dance, idiot," Mei said with a glare as they both started to move, with Naruto taking the lead. From spinning to pulling together for a while, the two of them were just lost in the music and each other. An hour later there were a lot less people dancing. Most had either gone to bed and there were others who were continuing the party and were certainly going to wake up tomorrow with a killer headache. But Naruto and Mei were still dancing, well, as close to dancing as possible, as Mei had somehow found herself resting her head between Naruto's head and shoulder while her body was flush against his, while his hands were wrapped around her voluptuous body and swayed slowly from side to side while his head was buried in her long auburn hair. "Are you tired?" Mei asked into Naruto's neck, causing him to shiver slightly as he felt her breath on him. "Not really. I was wondering actually if you'd talk to me more about what you were saying earlier," Naruto asked as Mei's words from earlier were still echoing in his head. Pulling her head away slowly, Mei looked into Naruto's eyes before leaning forward and rested her forehead on his, their noses barely grazing each other. "Really, you want to talk about that again? I don't mind, but could you take me home? My legs are starting to hurt," Mei whined as she pulled her head back and pouted. "You're a grown woman, for crying out loud, but I guess I'll do it since I am a gentleman," Naruto said proudly, causing Mei to raise an eyebrow. "I think I prefer you when you're being modest. You might want to watch out your head doesn't get too big," Mei snipped in and chuckled when she watched Naruto face fault. Shut up," Naruto stuttered, holding out his arm. "Ah, don't be like that, Naru-kun, I'm only teasing you," Mei said while wrapping her arms around Naruto's and leaned into him. The walk back to Mei's quarters was relatively quiet. It was the calm before the storm, and despite everything that would be happening tomorrow, both Naruto and Mei couldn't have felt calmer. Reaching her cabin, Naruto smiled as he watched Mei let go of his grasp and open the door and inviting him in. Of course he had been in several times, but every time he saw Mei's cabin he could only sigh at the sight of several stuffed teddy bears littered around. It was definitively one of Mei's secrets that would cause someone to be melted if they ever had the guts to spurt out that she had them. "Sit. Would you like anything to drink?" Mei asked as she walked into her living quarters with Naruto. "Ah, no, I'm fine, thank you," Naruto said as he sat down. "So what did you want to talk about?" Mei asked, looking towards Naruto. "Earlier, when we were talking, you were speaking and you sounded sad. I was just wondering if you wanted to talk about it," Naruto said and tilted his head to side and smiled. "Oh," Mei started, trying to ignore the warmth entering her heart. Trust him to think about her even after trying to play off the incident earlier. Of course, when she was speaking to Naruto earlier, she was a little drunk, and as it would seem, her mouth seemed to be a couple seconds faster than her brain, and it would seem she had spilled a little of her true feelings to Naruto, whether he knew it or not. Well, you see, May stuttered, not knowing how to start this conversation, and soon found it hard to even look at Naruto due to being too ashamed. It's okay, take your time. May's head snapped up towards Naruto in shock. He was still smiling at her. How could he make her so strong yet so weak at the same time, she wondered. Well, a woman's heart is something precious to us. It makes us do strange things that are totally out of character for us. It makes us feel so much and can cause us so much pain as well as joy. May frowned at her words. Even to her it sounded jumbled. She was beginning to worry that he wouldn't understand. I guess what I'm saying is that you shouldn't play with a woman's heart. It's fragile and can shatter so easily, yet it takes so long to put it together again. I just wanted you to know, Becca. May was cut off as Naruto had suddenly dropped to his knees and placed his hands on May's thighs, getting a gasp from her. Naruto-kun, May whispered as she couldn't see Naruto's facial expression due to his hair covering it. It's not just a woman's heart. We all have the same red blood pumping into our heart. We can all feel the same way, so why are you bringing this up? Naruto asked, looking at May intensely. Because I'm not just talking about any woman's heart, I'm talking about mine, May murmured. However, Naruto had heard it and gasped. Are you telling me this because you love me? Naruto asked, looking at May, and saw her nod. I'm sorry, Naruto said, looking away, finally understanding the situation. I'll leave if it helps, Naruto said, standing up, preparing to leave. However, as he started walking, he stopped when he had felt May grab his arm, stopping him from moving and looking at him in desperation. I understood the situation already. I invited you back knowing this, so please don't leave me tonight. And even though you may not have the same feelings towards me, please, for tonight, allow me to be your woman. May cried and gasped when she felt Naruto pull her into a comforting hug. Immediately she wrapped her arms around his waist. Are you sure? Naruto asked, kissing her forehead softly. He didn't know why but couldn't refuse May. He knew it was wrong. However, seeing May like this, the usually calm and collected woman he knew turned into a sobbing wreck, was something he hated to see, and if it would stop those tears he'd do anything for her. As he may not love her romantically, he still cared about her enough to stop her hurting, even if it was just temporary. Warning. May pushed her head off from Naruto's chest and looked into Naruto's eyes. She blushed slightly as she felt herself leaning in. How long had it been since she had kissed a man? Naruto also leaned down and met her lips, catching them in a soft, passionate kiss while pulling her body pushed flush with his. Her arms wrapped around his neck and played with his hair. May was certainly a different kisser than Tsunade, to say the least. With Tsunade usually she thought for dominance, while with May she allowed him to play with her mouth to his liking without any opposition. May ed as she felt Naruto flick her tongue with his and massage the inside of her mouth. Naruto was certainly talented. Perhaps he was a natural, or maybe he was experienced. The latter thought sent a tinge of jealousy flying through May. She gasped as she felt Naruto's hands grope her rear and gave both her cheeks a squeeze. Glaring slightly at Naruto, May suddenly smirked as she grazed her knee against Naruto's crotch and smirked triumphantly when she heard him groan. Take me to the bed, Naru-kun, May gasped between kisses, pulling on Naruto's hair gently enough so it didn't hurt him. Of course, May-sama, Naruto smirked, suddenly picking her up bridal style and carried her towards the bedroom. Dropping her onto the bed, Naruto was immediately above her and planted his lips onto hers once more. Naruto gasped as he felt May's hands running under his top, her nails were slowly scraping the outlines of his muscles. Discarding the top, Naruto smiled when May's eyes clouded with lust. It seemed his months of being in this war had done wonders on his body. However, he did in fact thank the gods for giving him good genetics. Nice, May purred, flipping Naruto onto his back and pinning his arms over his head, all the while kissing his jaw and Adam's apple. Oh, you like, huh? Naruto groaned out as May ed on his neck and slowly made her way down to his chest. I do. Is there anything else you'll think I like? May said, smirking at Naruto's pleasured expression as she kissed his chest. Why don't you go lower? I'm certain there'll be something you'll like, Naruto said, enjoying the feeling of May's hands and lips on his body. You mean this thing? Mei asked with a sly smirk on her face as she grasped Naruto's through his pants, causing him to arch his back in pleasure. Naruto gulped as he watched Mei pull down his pants and boxer shorts, revealing his erected. "Oh, I think you're right, I'm going to certainly love this," Mei said, bringing her face so close to his that he could feel her breath on it. "Beg for it," Mei whispered seductively, blowing onto his, causing it to twitch and nearly smacking Mei in the face. "Ah, Mei," Naruto said as she grinned evilly at him, and all the while wondering powerful women like Mei and Tsunade liked him to beg for them. "Say it," Mei said in more commanding voice. "Please, my," Naruto groaned out as Mei smiled. "Certainly," Mei whispered before closing the gap and placing a kiss on top of Naruto's before slowly pushing it into her mouth. "Oh, that feels so good," Naruto complimented as he felt Mei's tongue lapping at every inch of his while leaving none of it untouched by her lips. Slowly Mei took Naruto's out of her mouth and started working her hand around it while the other was used to discard her dress, leaving her in only black bra and panties that tightly covered her body. Mei, seeing Naruto's approved look, smiled and removed her bra, allowing her large DDS to freely pop out. "Try not to come too soon, Naru-kun," Mei laughed as she slowly wrapped Naruto's around her S and began to rub them together. Mei smirked as she watched Naruto fight the urge to just come, and after finding the right rhythm Mei started to squeeze Naruto's tighter. However, a sudden gasp came from her throat when she felt something probing her chin. Looking down, Mei smiled when Naruto's emerged from her cleavage and reached her face. Quickly she stuck her tongue out and flicked the underside of the head rapidly. Naruto groaned at Mei's oral work. She reminded him of Tsunade a little with her techniques. However, his thoughts were quickly stopped when he felt Mei take the head into her mouth and ate it while letting her tongue roll around the head. "Shish, shit, Mei, I'm coming." Naruto arched his back as Mei refused to let him out of her mouth and released his seed. Mei groaned as the spurts of Naruto's seed hit the roof of her mouth. She tightened her lips around his manhood in case any of his cum was spilled. Naruto groaned loudly as he watched the red head try to drain every last drop of cum he had. Mei gave one final before she removed her mouth from Naruto's and smiled at his slightly dazed expression. "What's the matter, cat? Got your tongue?" Mei teased as she'd her lips inwardly smiling as she could still taste Naruto's seed in her mouth. "You're beautiful," Naruto whispered, unable to say anything else as he looked up at Mei, her long auburn hair dropping down her back, her slightly pale skin glazed over with a light sheen of sweat, her one visible green eye staring at him lustfully, and finally her full lips puckering slightly mixed with her blue lipstick, giving her an exotic look. All in all, Naruto definitively had to say Mei was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. "Good answer. I hope you have more in the tank though," Mei said, lowering her panties down, giving Naruto a good look at her. "Huh, natural redhead I see," Naruto chuckled as he watched Mei blush slightly at his comment. "Shut up, I could say the same for you too. It's not often you see someone so naturally blonde," Mei muttered as she observed around Naruto's genitals. "Now lay back and show me that Uzumaki stamina," Mei said, grasping hold of Naruto's and giving it a few strokes before positioning above it and lining it up with her lower lips. "Warm," Naruto said as Mei lowered herself on him. His slowly filling her up caused her to in pleasure as the one her heart yearned for was rubbing the insides of her inner walls. "Shish. Shit so deep," Mei groaned out. It had been far too long since she had been ed and her was desperately trying to Naruto's up. Naruto shifted slightly, getting a better grip of Mei by placing both of her cheeks in his palms and squeezed them. Slowly Mei lifted her body till only the head of Naruto's remained inside of her before slamming back down. "Ah!" Mei cried out as she felt Naruto's slam into her womb and started to breathe heavily. "It's so tight." Naruto groaned as Mei lifted herself again, and just as she was about to slam back down again, Naruto bucked his hips up, meeting hers, causing her to widen her eyes, and just before she could scream, Naruto pulled her down into another kiss to muffle the sound. For numerous amounts of hours the sound of skin meeting skin and of pleasure roamed through Mei's cabin as they both continued to pleasure each other with their bodies. Position after position and orgasms after orgasms found both Naruto and Mei lying on a sweat-filled bed with Naruto above, Mei thrusting into her at a rapidly fast pace. "Na Naruto, I'm gonna come," Mei gasped into Naruto's ear as her hands were wrapped around his shoulders, clawing at his back, leaving scratch marks all over it while her legs wrapped around his waist. "Me too," Naruto panted as began to speed up with his thrusts and with a groan buried himself completely into Mei, painting her insides with his cum. Mei tightened her limbs around Naruto's body as she felt Naruto shoot his seed into her. The warmth that entered her womb sent a giant smile to her face. It was fair to say he had certainly showed her his Uzumaki stamina, considering the amount of time he was able to keep going even after coming. Naruto rolled to side of Mei and landed on the bed facing the ceiling. He was panting heavily. Mei may have not been able to last as long as Tsunade, however he was exhausted. Looking over at Mei, Naruto smiled as he watched her fighting to keep her eyes open. Quickly wrapping his arm around her, Naruto pulled Mei towards him so her head laid on his chest, her long auburn hair also sprawling out over his chest. That felt wonderful. Mei sighed as she wrapped her arms around Naruto's body and nuzzled her face into his neck and placed passionate kisses all over it. Naruto sighed in agreement as placed his nose into Mei's hair and kissed her head, just enjoying the moment he was having with the rebel leader. "Sleep?" Mei asked, yawning while shifting her body and enjoying the feeling of Naruto's cum sloshing around in her womb. "Yeah," Naruto replied, finally closing his eyes, knowing that in several hours he'd be participating in a battle that would define Kurigakure. Naruto groaned slightly as he felt a warm sensation around the lower parts of his body. He let out another groan as he felt a tongue circle the head of his, causing his shaft to harden fully. Opening his eyes and looking down, Naruto smiled as he saw Mei lying between his legs and ing on the head of his while her hands were carefully playing with his balls. "Well, this is certainly the best way to start a day," Naruto ed out at the feeling of Mei's oral work. Mei hummed and nodded in agreement before pushing her head further down the length of Naruto's, slightly scraping her teeth on his skin. "Damn, you're insatiable," Naruto ed again as Mei pushed her head as far as she could, completely enveloping Naruto's into her mouth. "It's your fault," Mei said, pulling Naruto's out of her mouth and began to place light kisses all around his shaft. "How so?" Naruto asked, staring into Mei's eyes. "You was pressing into my and it woke me up, plus it looked like you had the most painful case of morning wood," Mei purred, trailing her tongue down the underside of Naruto's, eventually reaching his balls. Repositioning herself, Mei moved her hands towards Naruto's shaft and begun to vigorously pump Naruto's. Meanwhile, Mei's mouth had moved towards his balls and her tongue was lapping at each of them. "I'm gonna come soon," Naruto groaned out at the feeling of Meiing his balls. "Good, we have to get prepared soon," Mei said, stopping her actions for a second before quickly launching back down and placing her mouth over his scrotum and giving both his balls a long. "Shit, here it comes," Naruto ed out while Mei grabbed the base of his and quickly placed the head into her mouth and flicked the it with her tongue. Naruto finally groaned in satisfaction as he came into Mei's mouth. The auburn-haired woman ed at the feeling of Naruto's seed filling her mouth, enjoying the taste more than some of the finest steaks. After a couple of minutes, Mei finally removed her mouth away from Naruto's with an audible popping noise and quickly positioned herself onto her knees. Looking towards Naruto, Mei allowed a sneaky grin to form onto her face before opening her mouth to show Naruto the load he had given her. Quickly closing her mouth, Mei rolled Naruto's seed around in her mouth and quickly swallowed the loading as she did. "Now why did you have to do that? I'm hard again," Naruto ed out, feeling his shaft harden once again. Mei looked towards Naruto's in amusement before grasping it into her hands and began to slowly tug on it. "Well, we still have time, it just means we'll have to get a wash at the same time," Mei said, watching Naruto's pleasured-struck face. "Sounds like a plan," Naruto said, trying not to show Mei how much hold she had over him. "I do still expect you to wash me," Mei said in a commanding voice as they both got up with her hand never leaving his shaft, while Naruto could only groan as he watched Mei's way from side to side. End. An hour later, both Naruto and Mei came out of her cabin, both feeling extremely satisfied and content, not to mention with giant smiles on their faces. Naruto chuckled slightly as he watched Mei walk in front of him with a slight limp from their earlier activities. Looking at Mei, Naruto was quite surprised in Mei's choice of clothing. Instead of her trademark long blue dress, she was wearing a tight black spandex tight top that covered the whole of her upper body and stopped just at the beginning of her neck, and on top of that was a gray chest plate that was secured from around both her shoulders. On her arms, Mei had metal arm braces on both arms that spanned from her wrists to her elbow joint, allowing full flexible movement. On her lower body, Mei had black spandex pants that reached to her mid-shins and a pair of metal braces around her legs protecting her mid-shins all the way up to her knees, and she had changed into a pair of dark blue sandals that covered her heels. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the effort Mei put in her appearance, as well as even despite the change in clothing she kept her hair the same, with her long auburn falling on her back reaching to all the way down to the bottom her back, and her hair was finished off with the usual bun she kept at the hat. Also applied her blue lipstick and blue nail polish onto herself so she gave off a seductress atmosphere. "What are you staring at?" Mei asked, turning around to see Naruto eyeing her up and down with a smile. "Nothing. It's just you look different slightly," Naruto said, causing Mei to narrow her eyes. "How so?" Mei asked in a tone full of danger, which Naruto picked up on and backed away slightly, putting his hands in front of him. "I mean you look more beautiful, that's all," Naruto stuttered, closing his eyes. He knew how dangerous Mei could be when she took something the wrong way. However, instead of feeling any pain, Naruto felt something soft attach itself to his lips. Briefly opening one eye, Naruto was slightly surprised at the sight of Mei kissing him. However, before he could pull her closer, she pulled back, showing a small blush across her cheeks. "Thank you. I love getting compliments from handsome men, and if you survive this war, I'll give you more than just a kiss. I believe you got a taste of what I'm planning last night. However, next time I'll be much more thorough with pleasuring you," Mei purred, puckering her lips slightly. "I guess I have something to look forward to then, don't I?" Naruto grinned before putting on a straight face. "Anyway, we need to get a move on, we're late as it is," Naruto said, walking ahead of Mei. "Hey, that was your fault," Mei shouted, catching up to Naruto before walking alongside him towards the heart of the camp and the rebel army. "With the rebel army?" Mei sighed in frustration as she looked down from the podium she was stood on, alongside her where Naruto, Ao and Chojuro stood. The reason for Mei being so frustrated was because her rebel army seemed both not serious and still thought they were partying like last night. In an attempt to gain their attention, Mei coughed loudly. It was enough for the three next her to hear. However, it seemed like everyone else had just ignored her and continued to talk among themselves. Looking towards Naruto, she was surprised when she saw him smile and gave her a nod. Not knowing why, Mei quickly turned around. She was brimming with confidence all of a sudden and quickly glared at the shinobis in front of her. Her one showing green eye was blazing with fury. "Shut up!" Mei shouted loudly, and immediately all the rebel shinobi turned to face her, a surprised look etched onto all of their faces. "Have you all forgotten why we are here?" Mei asked in a raised voice, causing them all to look down in shame. "For years we have suffered, due to being different and having different blood." Mei stopped to pause for a moment and looked at all the shinobis that were in front of her, and she could see they were all paying attention. "Over a decade. That's how long we've been fighting, and we've all seen friends, family, lovers die." Mei continued, sending Naruto a sly glance as she said lover. "But we can stop it all today. For the first time in over 10 years we are not outnumbered. We have the power to stop Yagura and take Kurigakure back once and for all. I just need to know if you're with me," Mei asked, and immediately every shinobi and even some of the civilians that were watching began to cheer. "Everybody, let's go reclaim our home," Mei screamed, raising her arm while everyone else continued to shout and cheer in agreement. "Well, she certainly got everyone pumped up," Naruto said, looking towards Mei with a smile as she basked in the cheers she was getting. "Yeah. Well, that's the easy part done now. All we've got to do is win," Ao said with his arms crossed. However, there was a small smirk on his face. "Yeah, but with this much determination there's no way we'll lose, right, Chojuro?" Naruto asked, looking towards the swordsman as he had the haramakiri on his back. "Yeah, I suppose," Chojuro answered coldly, causing Naruto to raise his eyebrows. Usually the man was too timid and shy to even talk and often played around with his glasses, however, like how he had his arms crossed and was seen wearing a scowl. I wonder what the matter with him is. Anyway, looks like it's about time to set off, Naruto thought, looking towards the army as they piled their way out of the small village that had been their camp for the last decade. You ready? Mei asked, looking towards Naruto. I was born ready, Naruto said with a grin, before setting off with everyone else to meet the Mizukage's army. 2 hours later, Mei and her rebel army had arrived at the edge of the forest that was right next to Kurigakure. There was a large opening that Mei had noticed separating the village from the forest, and it concerned Mei to succeed in their plan. They'd have to strike fast to catch Yagura and his forces off guard and storm through the gate. Alright, this is it, let's take back our home, Mei said with conviction, getting a nod from all the shinobis in the forest and set off charging towards the village. However, before they could even get a quarter of the way, a horde of kunais came flying towards the rebel army. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he stared at the opening gate of Kurigakure. There was no way Yagura could have known Mei would attack now. In fact, he'd thought that attacking earlier would have surprised Yagura due to the prisoners only being rescued a day prior. However, as Naruto stared at the ever-growing army Yagura had storming out of Kurigakure, he couldn't help but notice that both armies seemed relatively even in size, though maybe there were a few more of Yagura's side. As Yagura's army came out, lining up staring at the bloodline users with both hatred and fear in their eyes, however, Naruto glared when he watched Yagura emerge from the large mass of shinobis and alongside him a cloaked person. It seems you were actually planning on attacking, Yagura commented with a smirk as he looked at Mei's surprised face. How? Mei asked, fearing over the fact that someone had betrayed their own. Good question, however I think it'll all become clear when my friend here reveals himself, Yagura said, looking towards the cloaked individual. Slowly the cloaked person reached towards the hood covering his head and gripped it by the edges before pulling it down, causing a loud gasp to emerge from the rebel army. Hogosha, Mei said in a stunned voice as her once loyal soldier stood next to Yagura with a grin on his face. Surprised. It seems now I've finally gained your attention, Mei, Hogosha said, bitterness seeping into his voice. What? Mei asked in confusion, looking at Hogosha for answers. For years I tried to get you to notice me, I did everything you asked me to do, yet you barely spoke more than 5 words to me each time. But I thought maybe that was just your way of doing things, and that if I continued to do everything you asked me to do, you'd finally notice me, Hogosha said with a chuckle. However, when he came, I finally realized the truth. Everything I had tried to accomplish over the years was destroyed. I saw it every time you stared at him, how you would make time to talk to him, laugh, flirt, everything I ever wanted. Hogosha snarled a little at the end as he glared at Naruto, who was stood next to Mei. And last night everything was made perfectly clear to me when I saw you two kiss and head towards your cabin, Hogosha said through gritted teeth while everyone gasped at what Hogosha was saying. So this is out of jealousy? Naruto asked, understanding the situation. Hogosha looked at Naruto angrily before passing his gaze over to Mei, where his eyes noticeably softened. You could say that, I guess, but more importantly, this way Yagura has promised me that Mei will be spared and will become my bride, Hogosha said with a grin. So you've been manipulated? Naruto questioned, seeing Yagura smile. No, this is everything I've ever wanted, and I should have done this the moment you showed up so I didn't have to witness a full year of the two of you getting closer. I should have realized earlier that I couldn't compete with you despite being older than you, Hogosha said with bitter voice. What do you mean? Naruto asked in confusion, causing Hogosha to growl. It's obvious, isn't it? How was I meant to compete with you? Naruto Namikaze, the only living son of the Yondaime Hokage. It was obvious Mei was going to fall for your good looks and power, Hogosha said, chuckling darkly before looking at Mei. But now, Mei, you'll have no choice. I'll force you to be mine, Hogosha finished, laughing crazily as he walked past the Kurigakure shinobi with Yagura. This just got a lot more complicated, Naruto said to Mei. Yeah, I guess it has, Mei said with a nod before looking at her rebel army. Do not be afraid of their numbers. Together we can beat them and end Yagura's days of tyranny. What we are fighting for is stronger than them. We can't lose, Mei shouted to all her rebel shinobis, causing them to roar in approval before rushing past Mei, Ao, Chojuro and Naruto. The four of them watched as both armies clashed into one another. The bloodshed was inevitable. One after the other shinobi fell from every direction. Mei quickly narrowed her eyes towards Yagura as she saw him walk away into the forest with Hogosha. Ow, Chojuro, stay here and make sure we win this battle. Naruto, come with me, Mei said, running back into the forest closely followed by Naruto. Where are they going? Chojuro asked angrily as he stared at his crush and her lover run into the forest. To meet Yagura in battle. Keep your mind on the battle, Chojuro, Ao said firmly as he rushed into the battle as well, closely followed by Chojuro. With Naruto and Mei. You sure they went this way? Mei asked, jumping from tree branch to tree branch closely following Naruto as they sped through the forest. Yeah, that's his chakra all right, but why isn't he concealing his chakra? I think we might be walking into a trap, Naruto summarized with a frown, placing his hand onto the hilt of his katana. We'll need to be careful then, Mei said, with Naruto nodding in agreement. As the two of them made their way to a small opening in the forest, Naruto narrowed his eyes as he felt everything around him go weird. Glancing back, he noticed Mei had disappeared. Genjutsu? Naruto thought with a frown. Placing his hands into a seal to release the genjutsu, Naruto flared his chakra. However, when nothing around him changed, Naruto frowned. It seemed his chakra levels still hadn't recovered from the rescue mission. It's not going to work. Naruto turned his head towards the voice and narrowed his eyes at the sight of Hogosha as the man's upper body was hanging out of a tree. I had a feeling this was your doing, but once Mei realizes she'll release me from this, Naruto said. She would, if she wasn't stuck in the exact same genjutsu. My clan was well known for its genjutsu abilities, and for people like you and Mei who have a considerably large amount of chakra, this genjutsu will be hard for you to break, Hogosha said with a laugh. But before you find a way to break it, I'll kill you now. Hogosha laughed darkly before launching out of the tree towards Naruto with a large katana in one hand. Naruto grunted in pain as he felt a cut go across his leg, forcing him to one knee. However, just as he was about to retaliate, Hogosha vanished into the ground. I'm not going to kill you straight away, Naruto. I'm going to make sure you feel the same amount of pain I felt when I had to watch you and Mei together. Hogosha jumped out of the ground and slashed Naruto's back, causing him to stumble forward. Seeing his chance, Hogosha jumped forward, grabbing Naruto by the back of his neck before raising his katana. I'm going to make you feel as insignificant as I felt when you were around, Hogosha said, bringing down his katana, but before it could reach Naruto, Naruto had swung around, slicing Hogosha. However, to Naruto's surprise, the blade went through him like it would air. What? Naruto, though in confusion, using the moment to jump away. It's not going to work, just give up and let me kill you, Hogosha said in a bored voice. He was definitively going for a killing hit, but how could he hit me if his body was intangible? His attack would have phased straight through me, unless Naruto closed his eyes before putting his hands into a seal. Kai, Naruto said, and immediately a seal on his arm began to become visible and was glowing a blue color. Naruto's whole body gained a blue outline before it quickly vanished. Keeping his eyes closed, Naruto spun around and swiped his katana, striking Hogosha in the stomach, causing the man to howl in pain. Opening his eyes, Naruto looked upon Hogosha with a stoic look as he watched the man bleed heavily from the wound on his stomach. How? Hogosha asked, not understanding how his genjutsu could be broken. You made two mistakes. The first one was letting your emotions get the better of you and attack me blindly. Naruto walked over to Hogosha and pointed it towards the man's jugular. The second was letting me attack you to notice your body was intangible. I figured if I couldn't hit you, then you couldn't hit me either, and that's when I realized the secret to your genjutsu. It does no physical damage, it only allows you to make me think I'm injured. Raising his katana back a little, Naruto glared down at Hogosha. You should have killed me instead of talking about killing me. Goodbye, Hogosha. Naruto quickly stabbed his katana into Hogosha's throat and watched as the man's head rolled into the back of his eyes. Naruto watched as Mei grasped her surroundings, assuming she was finally out of the genjutsu. Mei looked upon the dead body of Hogosha before sighing. How did you break that genjutsu? Mei asked, annoyed that she couldn't break the genjutsu. A seal? Naruto said. A seal? Mei asked in confusion. Yes, I've applied several onto myself to store chakra. They don't hold back my strength and can only be used to disrupt the flow of chakra in my body, and it's quite useful against genjutsus, especially as I at them, Naruto explained, looking around as he could still sense Yagura's Biju chakra. So it disrupts the flow of chakra. That's incredible. How did you even think of that? Mei asked, astonished. I don't know really. Uzumakis have always been good at fuinjutsu, so I guess it must be in my blood, Naruto commented, still looking around. Mei looked at Naruto for a couple of seconds before scanning the area as well. She wasn't sure, but she could tell Naruto was hiding something, as he never in the year she had known him mentioned his heritage in that prospect. Do you think he's around here? Mei asked, dropping the subject for now in search for Yagura. Yeah, but he's concealing his chakra now. Makes me wish I was born a sensor type, Naruto mumbled as he heard the sound of a twig snapping. Duck! Naruto shouted, pushing Mei to the ground as a large arm of chakra swiped over their heads, which would have surely decapitated them. Great reactions. No normal person would have been able to dodge that, Yagura said, humor laced in his voice, while both Naruto and Mei narrowed their eyes at Yagura's display of confidence. You seem unnaturally calm considering the situation, Yagura. You do realize you're going to die here and now, Mei said in vicious tone. That may be so, but I have a feeling I'll still win in the end, Yagura replied, his mouth turning into a sadistic smile. What do you mean? Naruto asked in confusion as Yagura walked closer before replying. Let's just say bigger things are going to happen. Yagura shrouded himself in Biju chakra as he charged at both Naruto and Mei. Bastard, Mei said before going through hand seals. Yukai number jutsu, melting specter technique, Mei said before releasing a large jet of lava into the air above Yagura. Yagura watched as the lava descended towards him, confident that his Biju cloak would withstand it. However, as the lava landed on him, he flinched in pain as he was slowly starting to get burnt. However, as this was going on, Naruto stared at Yagura, his eyes completely widened. Let's just say bigger things are going to happen. The voice of Yagura echoed through Naruto's head. He wasn't stupid, he knew that if Yagura died then they would win. However, Yagura's words were making him feel uneasy. He knew a hint when he saw one. Is this what that snake mean? And if it is, how would the Mizukage have a connection to Minato? The only thing they have in common is that they are Jinchurikis. As soon as Naruto finished his thought, he gasped slightly as his mind started to put pieces together. I'd have more than you after me if I did. Naruto gritted his teeth in anger as Orochimaru's words came back to him. Was it possible that a group were targeting Jinchurikis, and if they were, there was only one person he could think of that would want the Biju? The masked man. Stealing his resolve, Naruto narrowed his eyes towards Yagura, who was exerting more Biju chakra to the point his body looked more like a beast. His whole body was red in color and his eyes were completely white while two tails were shown. Mei's eyes widened as Yagura caused her lava to fly off his body, sending lava blobs to go flying into the surrounding area, burning everything it touched. That's quite a dangerous technique you have there. To think it could damage me even when using Isobu's chakra, Yagura said in a demonic tone as he watched the effect of Mei's lava burn through the tree branches, the ground and even rocks around the area. Well, I'm not the leader of the rebel army just because I have a pretty face, Mei said with a smirk. People like you need to die, Yagura roared, dashing towards Mei at an incredible speed, and just as he was about to claw at Mei, Yagura found thick wooden branches wrap around his arm, stopping him from moving. That jutsu again, I forgot you could do Mukten without seals, Yagura said while trying to rip his arm free. However, he could feel the Biju chakra slowly being absorbed. Growling in rage, Yagura grew a third tail and fully transformed into his full Biju form, ripping the wooden branches of his arm with ease. Mei gasped in terror as she stared upon the large form of the fully transformed Biju that was easily taller than tallest tree in the forest. So this is the Isobu, Naruto murmured as he looked upon the giant turtle.